the show. Now, you often hear stories of people who are fleeing or businesses closing after a hurricane, but there are some instances when those storms come through, they bring new life and faces, particularly to our beloved Gulf Coast. And that is how our guest today, Di Fillhart, owner of Starfish Cafe there in Bay St. Louis, ended up in the Magnolia State. So we are welcoming her to learn a little more. Hi, Di.
Hey, hi, how are you?
I am so good, and I'm excited to share your story because you are a transplant from New York City, which we don't hear often here in Mississippi. So when did you first visit the Magnolia State?
I came 2 weeks after Katrina with the disaster relief team.
And what was it about the Mississippi Gulf Coast at her worst, to be honest? I mean, you came when it was, had been devastated by the storm. So what was it about the area that sort of drew you in and decided that this would be a good place for you to call home?
Well, we ended up, before we got to Bay St. Louis, we had stopped for gas in Baton Rouge, and I had done some cross-cultural things with New York City kids and kids from Asian churches in San Francisco. And their city team was at the gas station, and he said, "Where are you headed?" And we said, "Well, we're not really sure, but we think we're supposed to go to some place that hasn't had a lot of help." And he said, "I know where you're headed. It's Bay St. Louis, Mississippi." And he gave us the directions, and we drove in, and I guess I never drove back out.
So you've never left, or technically, I'm sure you may have gone back to visit or get your stuff, but that was it. Like, you didn't go back to New York, Di, and say, "Oh, I'm longing to be back on the Mississippi Gulf Coast." You came and just never left?
Yep. I came and never left. In May of 2006, I needed to renew my Pennsylvania, New York driver's license. And so I went to Miss Mike Cuevas and said, "Hey, listen, they say you have to have an address." I was living on the ball field, and DMV wanted an address. And before I knew it, we had a mailbox on the ball field, and I had an address, and I had a driver's license.
Well, there you go. You sound like a very driven woman, Di, that has a good vision and, sense of purpose. Did you feel like there was a sense of purpose for you to call Bay St. Louis home?
I just knew that everybody had lots of broken things, not just physical things, but the storm had just kind of tore everybody up emotionally and physically. And so I felt like I needed to just be an ear, a listening ear, a pair of hands that could help. And that's how I started out. And by the time the BP oil spill came around, I had been working with some people at USM that were trying to craft a graph or they were trying to get a grant. And what happened was they needed a community partner. And so they asked me to be part because Starfish Cafe, which was an opportunity to train people, had been in my heart for quite a while. Even back in New York, I wanted to give people skills so that they could support themselves.
So how long were you here calling Bay St. Louis home, Di, before you opened Starfish Cafe, the first one, because I know it's relocated?
Right. We opened up on June 5th, 2013. We signed the lease for the building in 2012, and it hadn't been done after Katrina, so we did all the cleaning and the renovations, and we opened on June 5th of 13.
And it was a working, or still is a working cafe with a specific mission. You wanted to train and sort of help others develop skills in the restaurant industry. What's specific, though, in terms of those skills? Because I was looking on your website, and it was talking about your student experience. You don't look at them just as employees. You look at them as also students. And I have here a wide range of life skills that typically you don't find being taught in the back of the house. So how is the Starfish Cafe learning experience a little bit different?
I think it's different because we really focus on the first thing that we look for in a student is to find their place of excellence. Like, what is it that that makes them shine? What is it that when they do it, their face lights up, and you know whether it's cooking or it's in the front or whatever. But that's also true when you do things like anger management and conflict resolution, resiliency training. We were blessed after the storm. Dr. Rogel from the International Stress Prevention Center had come to the coast in 2007 and trained a whole bunch of us to be trained the trainers in resiliency. And I think that part of the program has always had such a great effect on people to be able to look at their situations and then be able to get themselves back to where their strengths are so that they can overcome the situation.
Shoot, I feel like that needs to be one of the required courses in just about every junior college, high school, whatever it may be. Employment around the world needs to have a refresher on that probably every 6 months to a year. We'd all be in a better place.
I can tell you, it's amazing. In Israel, their entire country, their children, they start with it, and they've been doing this for, I think, 35, 40 years now. And they start with their children and first responders and everything go through this resiliency training so that they are prepared, not after the effect, how to get their feet back on the ground, but when the wind starts blowing before you get knocked over, you already have a plan in place of how you can use your strengths to get yourself back on your feet.
And you guys were actually having to do that once the pandemic hit. So everything was trucking along fine with the Starfish Cafe, I assumed. And then like every other small business, wham! It's not a natural disaster. Well, I guess you could argue that it was in a different sort of form. But here comes another sort of major event to sort of for small business owners. How was that for the Starfish Cafe?
I have a hard time hearing you. I'm so sorry.
That's
can you
okay.
repeat what you said? I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. Yes. So with the pandemic, how did that affect the cafe?
Oh. Huge. By March 13th, we closed. And the reason we didn't, the building down on Main Street, just a little over 1,000 square foot, about 1,100 square foot for the whole restaurant. So dining room, kitchen, everything. And so initially it was like, okay, well, we're going to close and this is going to pass by and it's all going to be well. By summer, that was not the case. And the board of our nonprofit and our accountant both, they said, we're going to have to do something. We had a mortgage on the building. And so the decision was made to sell the building and figure out where God was going to take us next. And that's exactly what we did. And we were blessed. The building sold, and we looked and looked and looked. And finally, the middle of December of 2020, we were able to find a place to rent and renovate. And we just recently reopened.
Just recently reopened. Did you bring back some of your students, or have you hired some of your students into the Starfish Cafe now that you guys are back open?
Yeah, both of that. We have an apprentice who actually did a year, and she's with us. We have a new student. We have another new apprentice. And we also added, when we got out here, we really saw the opportunity to do on-the-job training for students that were 16 to 18 that didn't have any work skills or experience. And that's been delightful. It's just been so much fun to have them come into the restaurant and to learn not just cooking and meals, but to actually learn life skills and opportunities to grow. It's just been a wonderful transition. As challenging as the 500 days were that we were closed, now that we're open, it's definitely a blessing.
I feel like everyone, should do hospitality of some kind before they can get like their adult card, whether it's working in a restaurant or working in retail, particularly around like the holiday season. I feel like we would all be more kind and compassionate if we worked on the other end of the spectrum of those who are serving us, at least in the restaurant industry. So where did you get your love, Di, of restaurants? Or cooking? Where did that come from?
When I was 14 years old, one of the guys that I hung out with, his dad owned a Greek restaurant, and so he said, "Listen, why don't you work with my dad and me for the summer?" And I'm like, "Oh, sure, why not?" So one of the things that has really molded me was I look back now, and I can tell you, prior to COVID, I really never paid much thought to this, but when I started working when I was 14, I was making $1.95 an hour. And back in those days, if you did something wrong, they took a quarter out of your paycheck. So it was you learned really fast. But I never thought about it until we got to here and where we are with COVID and where we are financially. And I realized, like, wow. So I'm 64 now. So here I am all these years later, and I went from $1.95. A minimum wage was $7.25, and I went, in 50 years, that's all we could do.
Di, you have done so much more. Stick with us. We've got more with her in the Starfish Cafe coming up now. And if you're exploring the Mississippi Gulf Coast, we hope you stop in to the Starfish Cafe, where they've just recently opened. We are talking to owner Di, and who ended up in the Magnolia State after Hurricane Katrina, all the way from New York City. Okay, Di, I meant to ask, Starfish Cafe, I love it. I've seen your Facebook page. It's a great logo and all, but why Starfish? Is there something specific behind the name?
Yeah, when we came from New York, we called it Operation Starfish. And that was the you could read the greeting card, that the bad storm, and there was a starfish on the beach, and the old man picks it up and goes to throw it back, and the young man says, "Why are you throwing that starfish back?" And he said, "Because it matters to this one." So from the very beginning, our mission was to just help one at a time, because we're a small organization, and that's always been what we've done, is one at a time.
And you were sharing with us here on Good Things about your first job in the restaurant industry, I think making $1 or less than $2 an hour. Fast forwarding, several decades. You said your age, Di, not me. And it hadn't changed all that much, but you're trying to make things a little bit better there at the Starfish Cafe. Why is that important?
I think it's important because by giving people a wage that's reasonable for the business as well as for the person, it helps people understand the value of what they do, and also the value of money. And if you're making a really small amount, it's like you never seem to ever make enough to be able to do much. So I think that our commitment to paying fairly and having salaries, that not just about the money, but the fact that it's the foundation of how we do culture and respect people and respect their work.
And they're putting up some pretty good work. I've been looking at your Facebook page there at Starfish Cafe, and it all looks delicious. Di, I'm a registered dietitian by trade, so I appreciate all the local and the fresh sort of foods. But, you really hone in on that. So you make sure that that's also a big foundation of what you guys do there. Why is that important, that you source local, you have it as fresh as possible, and that you make it when it's ordered?
We have, from the very beginning, I've always said you are what you eat. Part of that is because I was grossly overweight and found myself with a lot of health issues, and found that the healthier I ate, the better I felt. The better I felt, the healthier I got. And so it was really important in my personal life. And as we started Starfish Cafe, we just brought that right into it. And I also think that when you try and get things local, you support the local community. And if we continue to build one another up, everybody gets stronger. Everybody gets more education. They get more experience, and they can thrive instead of just survive.
Well, I know one thing that's surviving, Di, and that is your sourdough starter, which I feel like probably got a run for its money during the pandemic, since everybody started to bake sourdough bread. So this just caught my attention on your website, the fact that you guys there at the Starfish Cafe have a 5-year-old sourdough starter. How in the world have you kept it alive, or when did you start that?
Then we started. It was 7 years. We started with one starter, and we weren't very successful with it. But I didn't give up, and then we started the second one, and it survived actually 7 years. But I will say, regrettably, it did not make it through COVID. So I know it's so sad, but we're going to restart another one. We've already started the beginnings of it, and we've been blessed. I learned a lot from the whole process of how to keep it alive for all those years and stuff. I was hoping to be one of those San Francisco people that could sell 8 ounces of 25-year-old sourdough, but it'll take me a while to get there now.
Well, you still got time, and it sounds like you, with your health and wellness in mind, Miss Di, you're going to be on the Mississippi Gulf Coast for decades longer. But we want people to get out and visit our Gulf Coast, visit local shops and restaurants. And so you are a working cafe. You're up to some really good stuff. So when are you open, and what do you serve?
We're open Thursday 11 to 7, Friday and Saturday 11 to 8, and we're open that whole period of time. That's where we're open, and Facebook page, we post a menu usually on Wednesdays so that everybody has an idea, because it changes every week. There's a few things that stay on the menu week after week, but most of it is about what we can find and what sounds like Chef Zach wants to do. And then we're also, the other thing that we're involved too in is we're going over to Chauvin, and we've been working with disaster relief. And one of the things that's amazing about the Mississippi Gulf Coast is that from the very beginning, this will be our 8th trip out of this Hancock County to a place that had a disaster. And it's always people in the community that say, hey, here's some stuff, you got to go there. Okay, and we do. And so we're just active in every part of culture that we can put our feet in.
Which brings up the fact that it wasn't Hurricane Katrina, but still Hurricane Ida left, her own wake of disaster for our fellows there in Louisiana. So how are you guys? Is that what you're mentioning you're connecting to and sort of helping with, is taking food and resources from the Gulf Coast and sharing those with your Louisiana neighbors?
Yeah, we actually had there was a group of people that were connected to Cutoff, and in the process of that, on our website, on Facebook and the website, we had a lady that contacted us and asked us to please go over to Chauvin because they were really in desperate need. So our first trip to Cutoff, the part of the group went there, we went there, and then we traveled on to get there and found a great need. And so we've been going down on Mondays. We're actually going down this coming Monday, and this Monday will be a work team. They really need laborers right now to try and clean stuff and muck stuff. So we have some cleaning supplies and stuff that we're taking too. So we're just taking it one trip at a time, and whatever we can do a little bit makes a big difference to people, and that's kind of how we're going to handle it for now.
One day at a time. And, with Mississippi hospitality and all of our sweat equity, I know that, you got everything you need to keep moving forward there with the Starfish Cafe. One thing, though, do you like Mississippi winters better than New York's?
Oh, you know what? It's just, I'll tell you why. This is the coolest thing, because in the North, and I lived in the North most of my life, it's like you're always on the move or whatever. When I came here and did the distribution center, I went, oh my gosh, like 10 families have all the same last name. And I learned about culture. I learned about commitment to your people. I learned about love for the land that you live in. And those things were so radical for me. My move here was 48 years. So I had never been any place. The joke always was, my roots will never go down. They'll always grow up, because I never landed any place. So for me to be here 16 years in the same zip code baffles most of the people that have known me most of my life.
Have you convinced anyone else that knew you pre-living in the Gulf Coast to move down here with you, Di?
Actually, yes, two of my sons have already moved down, and my third son, his son will graduate from high school next year, and they're planning on coming too. So I guess we're going to make it family, and in a few hundred years, then maybe there'll be a few Fillharts around too.
Well, I think that sounds like a good thing, and I think you're right where you're supposed to be, rooted or not, Di. And I appreciate all that you're doing there at the Starfish Cafe. All right, round us back. Give us websites, Facebook pages, wherever we can go to get more information, and make sure we come out and enjoy some of your delicious food.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on there. And you can catch us on Facebook at Starfish Cafe BSL, and the website's the same thing, starfishcafebsl.com. So thank you so much.
And you're open tomorrow through Saturdays for folks
Yes,
who want to make their plans. Well, I appreciate you, Di.